All right, welcome back to College Football Addiction. We got Brian from Clemson Football Live on to talk about this Clemson NC State game from this weekend. And Brian, it feels pretty good to play a game. I remember in 2013, so certainly 11 years ago, Florida State played a game against NC State, and they were up 35-0 after the first quarter. My wife looked at me and said, "Can we go home?" It was not quite that large. It was 28-0. But the largest loss or the most points that had ever been scored against Dorian. But it feels pretty good for a game to essentially be over in the first quarter, right? Like certainly like big comebacks happen, but it felt good to maybe watch the second through fourth quarters somewhat relaxed as a Clemson fan.
Well, I mean, especially after week one. And I always go back to week one because that was the only team we've played so far this season with a pulse. And so for some of my Clemson fans who's like, man, he's just being pessimistic and negative, it is good to see Clemson's offense come out, open up the playbook, put the playmakers, whether they're freshmen or not, on the field, give Cade Klubnik the chance to throw and run the ball and have opportunities to operate within creative plays. I'm of the mindset, if we're going to crash and burn, let's crash and burn fast. And so they've opened up the playbook since the Georgia game. And we saw what they did against Appalachian State. We saw what they did against NC State. It was actually 45-7 at halftime. We know that a couple of weeks ago, Tennessee absolutely beat the color out of NC State's jersey, 51-10. It was 45-7 at halftime. Clemson had over 400 yards of total offense. So while I still think about the Georgia game, I think it's okay for us Clemson fans to be excited about the offensive explosion that we've seen since. Take it game by game and just let the Tigers prove to us whether they're back or not. But I think so far it makes us feel good and gives us a little something to talk about that's on the positive side.
Yeah, and I'm not a big fan of the transitive, like, oh, you did this did this. But I think Tennessee's offense only had 13 points against NC State in the first half. Now, they had the fumble 6, I think, that made it 20 – but again, and it's not like, oh, you did this and you did that, so it's a perfect comparison. But, yeah, right. NC State's defense held up okay against Tennessee to start. And so I do think, as an outsider, not, positive or negative on Clemson, like I do think it was pretty impressive. And, it all starts and ends, and this, and it all starts and ends with Cade. And he, from that first run, the wheels were probably never a question, but the wheels on that first touchdown run, and then the arm was pretty impressive. Like, whether guys it is easier to hit guys that are wide open, there's no doubt, but like, you still got to make the throws. We saw a game yesterday, last night where Florida State played, and we were missing some open guys with a former Clemson quarterback. So, you still got to hit them. And are you again, considering the opponent, are you pretty encouraged with the way that Cade has played since that Georgia game?
Sure. I mean, again, if he's your guy, let him operate in a system that gives him the chance to have the most success, whether it's the play calling, whether it's putting the 2 true freshmen out there who have done a fantastic job. Call the plays. Stop playing not to lose, because you always lose when you play not to lose. So I'm really encouraged to see Cade. I've taken up for Cade a lot. I've even taken up for DJ. I believe both these young men have had the misfortune of being in a Clemson system that was unlike the Dabo Swinney era of excellence, where we saw the 6 consecutive playoffs, we saw the 2 national championships, and so on. I won't go through all the talking points. He and DJ played in a time that's not so good offensively. So to see him come out 2 weeks in a row, put up incredible numbers, look dominant, look like the guy who went 45-0 in 6A Texas football, while everybody else is going, oh, he's a bust. It's like, guys, how many times are we going to do this? How many times are we going to not put the pressure on, the persons that deserves the pressure? So I'm glad to see for Cade, not only for the team and us Clemson fans, but I'm glad to see for him personally, he's given a chance to operate at a high level, and he's answering the call. So it sets us up really nice for the rest of the season, considering our schedule.
Yeah. I want to talk about that schedule in a minute, but, before we get there, defensively probably gave you everything you expected and wanted through the first 3 quarters, 9 of the fourth quarter. You're rotating guys, and maybe we could talk about that in a moment too. But the defense, like you said, 7 points at halftime. They scored 14 before that fourth quarter. And at that point, Clemson had 50 points, and you'd like to not let points up if you can, but I don't know how much that really mattered. But defensively, even against a mobile quarterback, a quarterback that you had to maybe change things up at the last minute and prepare something a little bit different due to the McCall injury. Obviously, Bailey took over at the end of the last game, but man, their offense, again, who NC State was playing matters too, but their offense did seem to look a little bit different under Bailey than it did McCall, and Clemson really didn't let him get anything done with any great effectiveness. And I know you've had less worries about the Clemson defense for sure, but it all kind of, as far as they're going to go, feels like it is kind of dictated on that side of the ball being elite, and they were again yesterday.
Yeah, and I want to say this: I was really impressed with C.J. Bailey. This guy, 6'6", 6'7", came in. He's taken over a team that has fallen apart. I mean, they look dejected. I expected more out of KC Concepcion. You could see the look on his face. You take his helmet off, the guy just looks like, man, why am I even here? So no. I want to give credit where credit is due for C.J. Bailey. He's a young player. He's got a lot of talent, and I felt like he did a great job versus a team who just pinned their ears back, came after them. Wes Goodwin knows what he's doing. He has the personnel coaching as well as the players. But we had a pick six off of the young man, took it back to the house. That was a fun moment. They were hitting him, knocking him around, knocked the ball loose. Nice recovery there by T.J. Parker. I think in high school he was called the quarterback killer, and yesterday he killed C.J. Bailey. So, when it comes to Clemson football, the defense has been the defense. Good grief, last night when we were watching Oklahoma and Tennessee, Herb Street said, when will Oklahoma's defense be thrown a bone and their offense get to rolling? And I just had PTSD because that has been the story of Clemson football for a while. So it's nice to see the offense give the defense something to work with, give them some energy based on the scoreboard and not just the defense being elite and having incredible coaching.
So, in the grand scheme, I don't know how much this matters, but NC State did score a couple of touchdowns. Well, I actually don't think it matters at all. My takeaway from it, I think, is what was cool and stood out to me. NC State scores a few touchdowns unanswered in the fourth quarter. Again, Clemson's probably just in get out of here healthy mode, and I don't think there's a lot you can really take away either way from that. Maybe NC State can ride that to maybe play a little bit better over the next few weeks. But what I did like was the Clemson intensity. The starters, the guys that had been rotated, they on that sideline, and I know fans are just let's just get out of here. Let's get out healthy. I don't care. Let's go. We're still going to win by 25 points, whatever. It was cool to see the intensity on the sideline of no. The standard is you're not going to let them score. And NC State did end up scoring some, whatever. I liked that from the leaders. I liked that from the guys who had gone out there and gotten that huge lead of 59-14. I really enjoyed kind of seeing that no. Y'all need to step up and play a little bit better because we built you this big lead, don't go blow it. So I don't know. I think that's a really good sign. As much as people like to, take shots at Clemson here and there, that's a sign of really good culture, that standard, that expectation. And I thought that was pretty impressive to see.
Well, you have to have that intensity because those guys who are being rotated in, they are the guys who will be playing in a few years. Mm-hmm. And we can either get them experience now or we can get them experience when there's no one else behind them. Yeah. And that's really been one of the major differences over the past 3 to 4 years at Clemson football. Back when you had the Deshaun Watson, even Kelly Bryant in between he and Trevor Lawrence, during those times, the offense was just so powerful. By the third quarter, you had second, third, and fourth string guys in. I mean, heck, we had cheerleaders coming in going, where do I stand? That's who NC State scored on yesterday. But, that is where you build that experience because even though Clemson's offense or Clemson's defense may be going up against better talent at times, you need them going up against guys who's not their teammates, who's not their buddies, who's not hanging out with them, who hates their guts. Yeah. And that's where you build that experience. And so I'm glad to see that intensity going, hey, guys, I know we're beating them, but it is our job on the defense to stop them. And on offense, it's our job to get the ball in the end zone. It doesn't matter what the scoreboard says because it may not matter now. It's going to matter later. So I enjoy that intensity.
Yeah. So looking at the rest of the schedule, you mentioned this. I think it sets up pretty well for Clemson. Obviously, the ACC is very hot and cold. I know Miami's got a lot of hype, but man, it seems like any team could win any week, any team could lose any week. Like outside of maybe Miami, Clemson, there's not a lot of great stuff going on other places. Cal was 3-0. They dropped a game yesterday. Florida State's in a mess. Like UNC, I think, JMU just scored again. But it sets up well. It might be the only team that Florida State can score on this year. It sets up well, I think, for Clemson. You play Stanford at home. That should be a game that, and I know they looked pretty good against Syracuse, but I still think like traveling to the East Coast, I think that sets up really well for Clemson. The game in Doak doesn't, weird things happen. Football is football, and if there was a game, I guess DJ was going to play good in. Like maybe it's that one. Just because football doesn't make sense at times. But that game feels like one that Clemson should have a pretty good, easy time with. At Wake, not incredibly challenging. Virginia, the Louisville game, fortunately for Clemson at home, I think that one will be tough. Going to Blacksburg, somewhat tough. Going to Pittsburgh, kind of a weird place to play, but Clemson's so much more talented. And then you even get South Carolina at home. I think this team's ceiling is 11-1. Now, do they get there? I don't know. It would surprise me if they lost 2 ACC games. So when I look at their ACC ceiling, I think it's 8-0 or 7-1 at worst, which I think is going to get them, unless Louisville runs the table, and that's the team you lose to. You could lose to Florida State and win out, and you're fine because they have 2 ACC losses. Like you could lose to one of these other teams, and they already have enough losses where you'd be. I think 7-1, which I kind of see as their ACC floor, unless things just kind of fall apart. I mean, I think they're going to have a date with Miami in the ACC championship. And, thoughts on just the trajectory of the rest of the year. As bad as week 1 was, because of the schedule and because Clemson just still has a ton of talent and is opening things up, it feels like it could be a really good finish to the year. Again, we're only a third of the way through, but it feels like things are kind of setting up for them to have a nice little run.
Well, success hinges off that statement you said. Clemson has a ton of talent. If you watch other channels, major channels, they've talked about major media channels. They've talked about the Clemson by roster is one of the most talented in the country, and that actually goes against the mindset and the view of Clemson, especially after week 1 and the past few years. So it really hinges off of whether we will use that talent, whether we will continue to be extremely aggressive like we've seen these past 2 weeks. I was kind of worried that yesterday we'd go back into our shell because we've done that. Mm-hmm. We've went back into our shell in certain games. And just to give some context, celebrating a win over an App State team that's not that great. I think this is one of the worst Appalachian State teams I've seen in a long time. NC State is man, how the wheels have come off those guys. But I want you to think back to last year. Last year, in our second game of the year, it was a home game. It was against little old Charleston Southern. Their defensive line was knocking our offensive line around like department store mannequins. And our offensive line was filled with 4-star players and 1 5-star. So you'd never know that. This year, we're seeing better offensive line play. We're seeing a more aggressive play call and scheming in these last 2 ball games. And I will hinge it on that statement that you made. If we use our talent, if we continue to be aggressive, if we continue to come into the games and say we're not going to play down to the talent, we're not going to read our own press, we're just going to come in, beat your head in, rip your logo off the side of your helmet, and then we're going to say next. As long as we keep that mindset, Clemson will make it to the ACC championship, and I predict that they would win it at that point. But pump the brakes. Take it game by game. Prove it to me. You know me. You know my approach. It's. I don't want to say pessimistic. Some people consider it pessimistic. I consider it realistic. Beat Stanford. Beat Florida State. Beat the rest of your schedule, and then we'll talk about clearing out space in Death Valley for a new conference championship banner.
Well, as much as Florida State fans are depressed with their season, they certainly would maybe pull out a little bit of bright orange and purple if you do go play Miami in the in the conference championship game. And I think that would be so. And I do think Miami's a lot better. I think they're improved. I would like to see them play a team with a pulse. I don't know if they really do this year. They do have to go to Louisville, and they do have to go to Georgia Tech. But their schedule's even, it's even easier than you guys is. They get Florida State at home as opposed to going to Doak, which is probably worth, I don't know, a touchdown if you combine both of them. So anyway, Brian, where can folks follow you? Where can they find more of your work?
Yeah, YouTube, Clemson Football Live. Find me on there. Stop in if you like talking college football, if you like getting all worked up, getting angry, getting mad. If you like to hit the thumbs down on my video, I don't care. Stop in there and let me know that you saw me on the show here. Thanks.
Awesome.
I really appreciate you having me on. It's always fun.
Yeah, thank you very much, man. Good luck the rest of the way. Not too much luck in 2 weeks, but outside of that, good luck the rest of the way.
I bet so, yeah. Well, thanks for having me on.
Thanks, buddy.